Let me tell you the reality of Europe, what's going to happen in the coming years. If Europe decides to confront the United States, we will crush you. And then the European Union will collapse. The entirety of Europe, what Europe is today, is completely dependent upon the United States.
Scott Ritter has worked as an intelligence officer for the United States Marines and as a weapons inspector for the United Nations. Thank you so much for joining us, Scott. Let's get straight into it. So let's talk about Greenland, first of all. So Trump really wants Greenland. He's threatened to put a 10% tariff on the European countries unless they agree to sell/give Greenland to him, to give it to America. And if they don't agree, he's hinted towards military action. But just right now, he's just announced at Davos that he won't do military action. But you never really know with Trump. In reaction to his threats, European Parliament seems like they're going to suspend the new trade deal that they've been working with together with Trump, together with the US. Now, despite all of this, you've said that you think Greenland is already a done deal. How come? Why do you think that?
Because the President of the United States has said that he wants it, and there's no force in the world positioned to prevent him from taking what he wants. I don't understand what Europe thinks. Europe's in an extraordinarily bad position, primarily because of, successive failed policies. They have allowed themselves for decades to become completely subordinated to the United States economically, politically, militarily. There is no genuine sovereignty in Europe. They can sit there and meet and talk and plot. But at the end of the day, if they want a trade war with the United States at a time when they have voluntarily severed their energy relationship with Russia, allowing the United States to hijack their energy security, knowing that we can strangle them in a heartbeat. I mean, come on. This is a tragic joke. I'm not happy about this. I'm not sitting here extolling what President Trump is doing. I condemn it in the harshest terms. But the fact of the matter is, there's not a damn thing Europe can do to stop President Trump from taking Greenland.
Do you think he's going to use military action?
Well, as you said, what the president says one day is not necessarily what the president does the next. I think the president was advised by his national security advisors to avoid pushing towards a military confrontation with a NATO ally, because this would be represent the immediate termination of the NATO alliance. And while that may be a desired outcome eventually for the United States, I personally think it would be a wonderful outcome for the United States. You don't jump off a cliff without a parachute. And, we have a 80-year transatlantic relationship that has defined, the security architecture of Europe, of the world. And you just don't terminate that without having a plan B. And I don't think Trump has a plan B. The plan B is, Fortress America, the domination of the Western Hemisphere. But we haven't completely consolidated our position there yet. So I think, and again, this should be a lesson to Europe. If you want a point of leverage, I just gave you one, the NATO relationship. The United States isn't ready to divorce. And Europe should rapidly come up with a plan for a European-only security arrangement and then boot the United States the hell off your continent. But you're not going to do that because you don't have political leadership. You don't have courage. You don't have anything. You're pathetic. I don't mean to be too harsh, but Europe is a collection of pathetic leaders at the head of pathetic states who are incapable of doing anything decisive.
Like you spoke about, they've latched on to America, and now that America is saying, well, listen to us, you've got to do this thing, give us Greenland, which Europe doesn't really want to. Are you saying that Europe has no option but just to listen to America because everything is reliant on American companies? Everything in Europe is reliant on America.
You always have options. If you're the 32-year-old child still living in your parents' basement, unemployed, eating mommy and daddy's food, using mommy and daddy's energy, and, being secured by mommy and daddy's home, one would think you have very few options. You do have an option. Get the hell out of the basement, go off, chart your own path, get your own job, make your own way. Europe's incapable of doing that right now. because the entirety of Europe, what Europe is today, is completely dependent upon the United States. The one aspect of freedom that Europe had, the energy security that was provided by their relationship with Russia, has been terminated. Now Europe is committing suicide in Ukraine. I mean, the dumbest place in the world to commit suicide. I don't understand ideologically why Europe allows itself to be subjected to revisionist history. This is a corrupt regime that has embraced a despicable ideology that is, it's a manufactured state. Historically, that's an accurate statement. And Europe's going to commit suicide for this. Why? Because they were told by Daddy, America, that this was necessary, that, to sustain the NATO relationship, NATO needed an enemy, and that enemy would be Russia. Well, it turns out the enemy was the United States all along. Europe just didn't realize it.
I mean, you talk about the need for Europe to become independent. So I just want to read a quote for you that the European Commission President said yesterday at Davos. She said, "It's time to build a new independent Europe," and that the shift in international order is not only seismic, but is permanent. And as well as that, you start to see, let's say, Canada, who used to think who thought they were allies with America. The other day, they made a trade deal with China. With a southern country, an eastern country. What they did was they opened trade barriers. They removed tariffs, which Trump has been putting up. So they said, where else can we go to? So they moved to China. Is this what's starting to happen, where all these European countries are starting to realize, okay, we can't do a deal with America. We somehow have to get independent of America. And the only way to do that is to start partnering with China, with Russia, and those other countries.
There's an awakening. There's no doubt about that. But I don't want to predict the future. And first of all, I respect Canada's sovereignty. I respect Canada as a friend of the United States. They have been a loyal friend for a long time. Don't blame Canada for any misperceptions of the equity of the relationship. It was a relationship dictated by the United States for decades, not dictated by Canada. And suddenly to hold Canada accountable for policies that are linked to previous presidential administrations, I think is intellectually unsound and unfair, but that's what Trump is doing. But I just want to remind the Canadians, reread the National Security Strategy document, please. Because as long as Donald Trump is the president of the United States, your trade relationship with China will not be allowed to stand unhindered. We will crush you. We will destroy you. I also want Canada to take a look at a map and see how far away China is from Canada and how close Canada is to the United States, and understand the situation you are in. And geographic reality means that Daddy, who lives just south of the border, owns you. And you're not going to find freedom in the arms of an Asian lover thousands of miles distance across the Pacific. And this is a harsh truth. Everybody has come to the realization now. I mean, again, I couldn't agree more with the conclusions reached by, the head of the European Commission. It's an accurate statement. It's a fully accurate statement, but it's totally divorced from reality. What the hell is Europe going to do? I mean, you don't have an economy. Let me tell you the reality of Europe, what's going to happen in the coming years if Europe decides to confront the United States. We will crush you. And then the European Union will collapse. And then Europe will be a collection of sovereign states, many of whom are going to gravitate to the United States because of their weakness. Others will gravitate away. And now Europe is deeply fractured. And the United States will exploit this fracturing. I mean, to be honest, the best thing Europe could do right now is get out of NATO and join a defensive alliance with Russia. But they won't do that because they've been conditioned not to. But I think Europe needs to get rid of its current political and economic elite. Everybody who's sitting in Davos today is an enemy of Europe. These aren't the friends of Europe. These are the people that got you where you are. Don't forget that. They're all sitting there today kneeling before King Trump, afraid to do anything. But these are the people that got you to where you are. Nobody else got you to where you are but the elites gathered in Davos. And to pretend that they're somehow going to lead you out of the problems they created is absurd thinking. Europe has to redefine itself. It has to elect new leadership, and it has to chart a new economic course, one that doesn't have them linked to, for instance, a G7 relationship, which is, by definition, a subordinate relationship to the United States. Declare independence. But the problem with declaring independence is you can't expect a free ride. You're going to have to earn it. And I don't think Europe's prepared to earn anything at this point. They continue to look for the handouts from the United States, handouts that will not be coming.
So do you think the future of the world, of Europe, is that they will start to get divorced from America and start to break up these NATO relationships, the EU, and start to become much more of a multipolar world, maybe something that we saw in the 20th century, where there's one side that's Russia and there's one side is America, maybe even something like the Cold War again, I don't know. But do you think that's what's mostly going to happen? Each country is going to go for itself, and not like Europe, there won't be like a European bloc attached to America.
That's the way I see it. That doesn't mean that's the way I want to see it. Look, the dream of a united Europe was a nice dream. It was a nice dream. But it's a failed dream because the united Europe concept was completely dependent upon a security infrastructure and an economic infrastructure dominated by the United States. Europe thought they were charting a path towards, regional sovereignty, and all they did is ensure their collective subordination to the United States. Can they recover? Look, stranger things have happened. Is there a leader or a collection of leaders out there in Europe that have yet to be defined who can emerge and unite Europe and guide them out of this difficult situation they find? Yes, but the leaders aren't named Macron. He's a failed leader of France. The leaders aren't named Starmer. He's a failed leader of England. The leaders aren't named Merz. He's a failed leader of Germany. Europe today is governed by a collection of failed leaders. There is no way to escape that conclusion. And these failed leaders are advised by economic advisors who have led Europe down this path of calamity. Who the hell thought it was a good idea to cut yourself off from Russian energy without a viable plan B? I mean, I'm not an economist. I'm just a simple Marine. I don't claim to have any, complex, global financial transactional capacity in my gourd. But I know that 2 + 2 = 4. And when you take a look at Europe and you take a look at how Europe became successful, especially in the 70s and 80s, a large part of that was because Europe wasn't paying a premium for energy. Europe was getting a good deal from the Russians, and Europe was also living off the largesse of the United States in terms of security. The American underwriting of NATO helped liberate Europe of the need to spend trillions of dollars over the years on defense. And so because of this, Europe was able to prosper. I'm glad Europe prospered. I'm glad the German workers were able to retire early with good pensions. I'm glad the French were able to reduce their work hours. I think it's great that the quality of life in Europe went up, but the Europeans have to be realistic. That's the equivalent of the 30-year-old kid down in mother's basement getting an increase in their allowance. You might appear to be wealthier, but all it means is that you are forever beholden to mommy or daddy or whoever's paying your bills. And that's the reality of Europe today. America's been underwriting your bills. Russia's been underwriting your bills. And what you've done now is cut Russia off and put yourself in a position where America now ruled by, again, I can't blame the Europeans. Who the hell thought that the United States of America would be ruled by an narcissistic egomaniac who would replace constitutional rule with a cult of personality? The speech he gave at Davos was an embarrassment to him, an embarrassment to Davos, an embarrassment to the concept of law-based global order, and an embarrassment, moreover, to the American people. We are a constitutional republic, or we used to be. And yet we are governed by a man who says nothing matters to him. No law matters, just his own sense of morality. Who could have envisioned that? Was that on your bingo card? It wasn't on mine. And yet here we are. This is the reality that we face. We have an unprecedented threat to everything the world has stood for decades. And the threat is in the form of an American president. Who would have thought that? No one. But it's the problem we face. And unfortunately, as critical as I am of Europe, understand that I'm equally critical of the American people. My God, what have we done to our republic? What have we done to our Constitution? What have we done? As imperfect as we have been over the decades, we at least stood for something noble, maybe never attainable. Maybe the shining city on the hill was just a pipe dream, but at least we dreamed big. And the path that we wanted to get there was a path that was based upon principles. Today, we've just thrown all that away for this narcissistic orgy of egomania, this modern day Caligula that rules over a failed state, because America is a failed state, because America is defined by the Constitution and only by the Constitution. And without the Constitution, we are nothing. We are failed. We may succeed on the ledgers temporarily. Again, I don't know how sustainable anything Donald Trump does is in reality, but America has failed. So as critical as I am of Europe, understand I'm as equally critical, or even more so, because this hits home, about America and what America has done.
Just a question about the last question about Greenland. Why does Trump even want Greenland in the first place? Denmark said you could put as many troops there as you want to. I think they used to have something like 15, 25,000. Now they only have like 150 troops. But why do they even want to own Greenland in the first place when they could just do whatever they want with it?
Ego. Let's be dead straight honest here. What you said is absolutely correct. If the United States wants to build bases on Greenland, we can build as many bases as we want. We can build whatever we want on Greenland. They will sign whatever treaty needs to be signed to give us the ability to do this. There's no objection to this whatsoever. Donald Trump speaks of, Russia and China. See, you do understand that I got debanked the other day. The U.S. government, is continuing their attack. So the more I speak, the more likely it is I'm going to be debanked in the future. But what the hell? The fact is we are dealing with one of the most ignorant men in the world, advised by some of the most ignorant people in the world. This Make America First, this Make America Great Again, grouping that he's surrounded himself with are just a collection of sycophants who don't represent the best of America. They represent what's best for Donald Trump. And so he has people whispering in his ears about that which can make him great. People who look at a map and say, look, Mr. President, we could turn this big mass here into ours, and we'll have access to the Arctic Sea, and we'll be able to block the Chinese and the Russians. But that's just ignorant. I mean, yes, you have access, but we already had access. You see, we're part of an Arctic organization. We're part of a NATO alliance. That means that Greenland's waters are our waters. We have a collective responsibility to defend them. We don't need to own Greenland to speak of that. So every argument this president makes is a lie. Greenland's resources, the economic potential of Greenland will not be fulfilled in Donald Trump's lifetime. I mean, we're not going to suddenly turn Greenland into, this mass producer of rare earth minerals that's going to, challenge the Chinese. That's just another lie that the president is telling and his advisors are telling. This is about ego. This is about Donald. Look, Dmitry Peskov said it best, I think, the other day. He said, if Donald Trump takes Greenland, he will go down in history. He didn't say if this was going down in history in a good way or a bad way. He simply said he will go down in history. And that's all Donald Trump wants. Donald Trump wants to have his name carved in some monument somewhere as a great leader. This is about his ego. And the moment a president of the United States allow his ego to get in the way of what's best for the American people, the American nation, and indeed the world that he's supposed to be the leader of, it means that the world is no longer what we thought it was. In Davos today, we saw a mentally ill person, a man who is infected with narcissistic personality disorder of the worst kind. And because this mentally ill man has the power of the United States behind him, he represents a threat not just to the American people, not just to the Inuit of Greenland, not just to the Kingdom of Denmark, not just to NATO, not just to Europe, but the entire world. If you didn't listen to that speech and say, "Oh my God, what is happening?" then you weren't listening to that speech.
You spoke there about Trump's ego, and the other day, I think it was yesterday, Trump asked Macron to come on his peace board for Gaza, and Macron said no, and then he got so personally insulted that Macron said no, that he threatened to put a 200% tariff on French wine. So that just shows that. And we'll talk about much more about Gaza later, hopefully, if we have a chance. But just
one more thing. I just have to mention it because, it's almost like we're writing a comedy skit, except it's not. But this president wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of Norway, chastising him for the fact that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee didn't give him the Nobel Peace Prize, even though he deserved it because he stopped 8 wars. And therefore, because this man of peace was snubbed with the Peace Prize, he's going to choose war as his option now. And I mean, first of all, just the childlike nature of that thinking. I mean, a third grader couldn't come up with more childlike behaviors. The ignorance that's manifest in that letter, as if the Prime Minister of Norway had anything to do whatsoever with the selection committee decisions made for who got the Nobel Prize. We're dealing with ignorance on a level that's never been seen before. Sure, we may have had presidents who may not have known everything, but they surrounded themselves with advisors whose job it was to know these things, so that when the president interfaced with the public at large, especially on a global in a global setting, he did so in a way that implied intelligence, implied knowledge, implied fact-based certainty. This president's just a joke, a tragic joke. I just felt I had to throw that in there because it's, I've never been more depressed being an American. I love my country. I love my country deeply. I would die for my country, and I will die for my country. But this man doesn't lead my country anymore because my country is a constitutional republic. This man behaves as if he's some sort of deranged, syphilitic emperor of past times.
Yeah, as you spoke about that letter there, it's just crazy that the President of the United States would send a foreign leader a letter saying, I don't care about peace anymore because I didn't get a peace prize. Crazy. But I want to talk about his speech today. So in his speech in Davos, he said something very interesting about Europe. He said that, in his national security thing that he did a couple of months back, I think it was, he said that he considers Europe as, I think it was like going through a civilizational collapse, or he used wording similar to that, and sort of
civilizational erasure.
That's the one. Yeah. But yet today he said that he needs Europe to be strong and united, because a strong and united West is actually good for America. So I guess my question is to you: does America see Europe as the enemy or as friends?
Does America or does Trump?
Trump.
Yeah, because it's two different things. Trump, your question implies the existence of principled values that are premised on knowledge and information, facts. That's not how this president operates. Look, if we're to look at it from a logical standpoint, the United States is comprised of refugees from almost every nation in the world. But the heart and soul of America's history is derived from the immigration of Europeans to the United States, who brought their cultures, their values to the United States, and then adapted to the reality of the American Constitution. But we are a reflection of European values, and therefore we should always have close and personal relations with Europe because we're relatives. And relatives are allowed to disagree, but relatives should never fight. Even though we've gone over twice in the last century or so to fight Europe's wars. The whole purpose of the post-war order was to make sure that that didn't happen again. And that should be the goal and objective of the United States. I'm not against a united Europe, not at all. And I think the vision of a united Europe is a noble thing. And it's good for America because it promotes stability. Donald Trump doesn't stand for any of that. I mean, listen to the nonsense he was blathering on about Switzerland and tariffs and the arrogance. He didn't know. Was she a president? Was she a prime minister? I don't know, but it was a lady and she was very aggressive to me. And she said, please, Mr. President, don't do this. And I said, I'm going to do it. And I did it. And then she said, don't do it. And then I decided not to do it. And it was purely transactional based upon the notion that Switzerland was stealing $41 billion from America in terms of a trade deficit that had to be balanced through tariffs. It was dollars. The only thing that mattered to Donald Trump was dollars. There was nothing in what he talked about in the relationship with Switzerland. While he did say, great country, great people, wonderful people, but you're only great because of me. You're only great because of America. Nothing else you stand for. Swiss democracy, Swiss neutrality, the history of Switzerland. None of that matters. Only me, the great Donald Trump, and the United States that I lead. We made you. We are you. You can't exist without us. That's his attitude towards all of Europe. And if you didn't pick that up as a European, I'm sorry, you might want to have to go back to university and take a couple classes in logic and reasoning. This is the sad state of affairs. I mean, look, economic relationships are important. I mean, we've been struggling. Every nation struggles to try and find a balance, especially in a globalist environment where we're supposed to be, we decided that trade barriers aren't good for the economy. We need free trade, market economy, et cetera. We've been struggling with that because tariffs do exist. Europeans impose tariffs on us and we impose tariffs on the Europeans. And we've been doing this for a long time, but we try and find a balance. And because we're allies, the United States has often accepted a trade relationship that's not to our exclusive benefit so as to help out our allies, economically and thereby politically. And because there's a direct relationship between economic stability and political stability. And of course, we want political stability in Europe. So what this president has said is none of that matters. The only thing that matters is that this relationship is to the exclusive benefit of the United States because we made you. And this applies to everybody. There's not a European nation that it doesn't apply to. And so we have to be careful. I mean, Donald Trump's speech, I'm all over the map here, but I'm just so disturbed by what I just heard. His speeches are amazing things because they're written by speechwriters. He's reading from a teleprompter, but every third word is ad-libbed. So he'll read us, and you can tell where his speechwriters are, because he's saying things that Donald Trump would. Yeah, he's saying things that Donald Trump would never say. As we move forward collectively to a greater world, but a world that's only great because of America. See, that's his ad lib. You're only great because of me. I look around this room and I see many people. I mean, you guys are like 50. There are 50 people wanting to get this seat for every one. And you guys are smart. I mean, your IQ is your genius. You're here. That's not written by a speechwriter. This is Donald Trump's thinking. So please, all the Trump watchers out there, don't get confused by the words written by a speechwriter. Focus exclusively on the ad libs of Donald Trump. And that'll tell you exactly where this mind his mind is. And it's all about promoting himself as the master of the world and having relationships that are to the exclusive benefit of the United States. How Europe fits into that is yet to be seen, but it's not as an equal partner or anything. Look, again, you have to listen to what he says. Europe has opened the floodgates to immigration that have allowed, low IQ people to come in. And then he conflates that or, relates that to the experience in Minnesota. And now we have the Somalis, who apparently are higher IQ because they're better thieves than we thought they would be. But you understand the inherent racism that exists in what this man is saying. It's an us versus them. It's a white versus dark attitude. And basically he's saying that Europe is not as white as it needs to be, that Europe needs to purge itself of, the racial impurities that Europe is allowed to come in through immigration. And there are certain nations, and this was spelled out in the National Security Strategy document as well, where they said there are nations whose demographic changes are such that they would not qualify for NATO membership at the time that NATO was created. I don't think NATO ever had a racial purity test. So again, that just shows the inclination. But what he's basically saying is, when NATO was created and you thought of Germany, we all know what a German looks like, white. According to Hitler, they should be blonde and blue-eyed. Not all of them are. But the point is, we know what a German looks like. We know what Brits are supposed to look like, white. We know what Swedes are supposed to look like, white. French people are white. This is the racist truth of what Trump is saying. And today, when you go to Europe, you don't see, the homogeneous white population. You see something different. And this is disturbing to Donald Trump. And Europe needs to reflect on that. Don't believe the words written by the speechwriter. That's just pretty garbage thrown out there to confuse. Listen to the ad libs of Donald Trump. That's where the truth lies. And the truth is very ugly.
So we've talked a lot about Trump's relationship with Europe. Let's move on to talk about Trump's relationship with Russia. Now, you've said that you think Trump, America, their goal with Russia is to have a subordinated Russia kneeling at our knees and Vladimir Putin removed from power. Is that Trump's goal? Does he want a regime change? What does he want with Russia?
I used to, look, I'm somebody who believes in good relations between the United States and Russia for a number of reasons. First and foremost, because I want to stay alive. And Russia has the largest number of nuclear weapons in the world. And if we get into a confrontation that leads to military engagement, we all die. And so I have a very selfish reason behind wanting good relations with Russia. But this isn't a situation where I hold my nose and go, well, this relationship stinks, but for the sake of survival, I'm just going to hold my nose, throw on some perfume, and continue forth. I like Russia. I've been to Russia many times. I worked in the Soviet Union back in the 1980s and early 1990s. I have appreciation for Russian history, Russian culture. I'm an imperfect speaker of the Russian language. But it's not that you have to, the concept of having good relations with Russia doesn't require a giant leap. It's actually one of the most natural things one can imagine once you get to know the Russians. The problem is that because Russia has been painted as an ideological enemy, an economic enemy of the West, and now a geopolitical opponent or adversary of the West. It's the same principle. During World War II, in order to fight the Japanese, we had to fight the Japs, the Nips, and you had to dehumanize them. We called them monkeys, so we could kill them. And it's the same thing when you fight the Germans; they become the Hun. They're no longer humans. They're something different. You give them a name that dehumanizes them so you can kill them, so you can confront them without being infected with basic principles of humanity, where if you see somebody needing help, you reach out your hand to help, regardless of what color they are, regardless of what language they speak. No, when you go to war, when you have an adversary that you're willing to confront militarily, you have to dehumanize them. And Russophobia is just that process. Russophobia is a infection, an intellectual infection that the West gives itself so that we can confront Russia. And the reason why we have to infect ourselves, and I'm just being dead on, I mean, I don't mean to put you on have you been to Russia?
No, never been to Russia.
Okay. And I'm not going to ask you what your opinion is because it doesn't matter. But my point is, then you don't know Russia and you don't know anything about Russia. You may think you do. You may have read books, seen movies, etc. But until you go to Russia, until you meet the Russian people, until you sit down and break bread with them, until you immerse yourself in their culture and their traditions, and you realize that they're not perfect, but they're not bad either, that they're the easiest people to get along with in the world today. And I have been all over the world. The Russians are not hard to get along with. You just have to treat them with respect and be respectful of who they are and what they are. They're not seeking to dominate anybody. But we're not allowed to tell that truth. We have to posture the Russians as some sort of great evil, because how do we justify the existence of NATO? I mean, Dwight D. Eisenhower, when NATO was formed in 1951, he said, if American troops are still in Europe in 10 years' time, then this exercise has failed. That exercise being NATO. And yet, here we are 80 years later. NATO's a failed. There's no reason for NATO to exist. It was created on, a artificial exaggeration of a Soviet threat that didn't exist, a misunderstanding. George Kennan's long telegram, which he wrote in February of 1946, which was used by the Truman administration to create the Truman Doctrine, one of containment in confronting the Soviet Union ideologically and economically, transitioning into military containment through NSC 68, passed in 1950. Kennan later, reflecting back, said it was a mistake, that they misunderstood what he wrote. So the Cold War was a mistake. A mistake for what reason? Well, let's go back to the root cause of long telegram. Kennan wasn't asked to write a reflection on the nature of the Soviet threat to Western society. He was asked a simple question by the Department of Treasury. Why aren't the Russians buying into the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank? Why are the Russians rejecting a Marshall Plan type of, effort that they can help them rebuild? And the answer was because the Soviet Union didn't want to subordinate its economy to the West. Simple. They wanted economic sovereignty. Well, we couldn't allow them to have that. And so the whole Cold War was premised on a lie. And then what we did is we used the Cold War to shape a European reality, NATO. I mean, come on, people have to think hard here. Go back and study your history. You know that Germany was a Nazi state that we defeated during the Second World War. Most people, I think, today tend to forget that when they listen to Merz talk about the remilitarization of German society. Normally, that should elicit, horrific revulsion on anybody who knows the history of Germany. They would say never again. But no, they're like, no, that's a good thing because of Russia. And again, the idea that Germany is going to remilitarize to confront Russia means you are absolutely ignorant of history. But the point is, the Germans were never denazified. It's just a statement of fact.
Do you think till today they're still not denazified?
They're not denazified. The same. Look, to create the Bundeswehr, they had to resurrect the Wehrmacht, inclusive of German generals who were guilty of horrific war crimes. We know this to be the case. It's not even debatable. We know that many of the German generals who were appointed into NATO positions were convicted of war crimes, and they should have been put to death or imprisoned for life. But I think it was McCloy, the American commissar that came in and took over. He pretty much oversaw the pardoning of them all, the whitewashing of them all. Eisenhower set up a board of American generals who worked with German generals to publish their memoirs in a way that purged them of any responsibility for the crimes of the Second World War, instead focusing on the pure military art of what they did. That is whitewashing. The industrialists who used slave labor were allowed to not only stay in position, but to thrive economically. And many of the Nazis who had skill sets that we wanted, we brought to the United States and cleansed. So Germany never denazified. They just simply put on a different suit. They took off the swastika, put on the pinstripes, and then sat there and pretended to behave. But deep down inside, the Germans still have the same ambitions, and we see the ambitions playing out today. The concept of Germany as a European power, the concept of Germany as being the dominant European power, the concept of Germany being the dominant military power. There's a direct connectivity between what many Germans now, and you see it's horrible what you see on social media, where people are starting now to come out and say, America fought on the wrong side. We fought on the side of the Bolsheviks. We should have fought on the side of the Germans because the real enemy is the Jew. Wait a minute, guys. Are we having this conversation? And the answer is yes, we are having this conversation. There are people out there having this conversation, and they're growing in numbers. So, no, Germany was never effectively denazified. NATO was always an artificial construct pushed on the United States, to be honest, by Winston Churchill, and the need to sustain British Empire by creating an enemy worthy of empire. And the United States bought into it. But remember that what was it? Lord, I can't remember his name. The first Secretary General of the United Nations, a British officer, Hastings, Lord Hastings. What is the purpose of NATO? To keep the Americans in, to keep the Russians out, and to keep the Germans down. Wow. Really? That's what NATO was about? And the answer is that's what it was about. But then at the end of the Cold War, why did NATO continue? Why did we? Because it became more than just this artificial artifact, the artifice to, shape Europe. It became a center of political and economic power from which the European Union arose, by the way. And in order to sustain it, you need an enemy. And the enemy was the Soviet Union. But we had to keep it as Russia. But in the decade of the 90s, after the Soviet Union collapsed, we collectively put our foot on the Russian neck, and we demanded that Russia be subordinate. We tried to destroy Russia, to break Russia apart. Again, study your Russian history. Go to Russia and talk to the Russians about the decade of the 1990s. It's a horrific time. Millions of Russians lost their lives. Millions of Russians lost their lives. Millions of Russians lost their lives. The life expectancy plummeted. Suicide was outrageous. The pensioners, the people who won the Second World War, who defeated Nazi Germany, fell prey to predatory criminal aspects of Russian society that emerged in the lawlessness that existed in the decade of 1990s. Russians were taught to hate Russia. Russians were taught to revere the West. Russians were taught to turn their back on their culture, on their history, on their values. And this was good for the West. This is what we wanted from the Russians. Then Vladimir Putin came into power and said, that's not the way it's going to work. And he taught Russians to fall in love with Russia again, to respect themselves, to stand up, not to dominate the world, but to stand as equals among the world. And those in the West who previously had their foot on the neck of Russia resented this. And so we've been looking to destroy Russia and get rid of Vladimir Putin ever since. Donald Trump believes in that. Again, you just have to listen. You have to look at the reality. He's a businessman. So businessmen not only say things, but they do things to back up what they want to do. If you have a business plan of action, you should put building blocks in place that lead you in that direction. He claims to want to be friends with Russia, but what has he ever done to be friends with Russia? Name one thing he's done to be friends with Russia. His first term ended with him saying, I have been harder on Russia than any other president. This is a man who said he wants to be friends with Russia. I've been harder on them. During his first term, he allowed the CIA to build 20 bases inside Russia, inside Ukraine, that were focused on bringing Russia down. That's not a friend of Russia. Today, he has a Secretary of Treasury who says his sole goal with Russia is to collapse the Russian economy. That's not a friend with Russia. He tried to kill the Russian president on December 29th by having the CIA work with Ukraine to send 91 drones against the Russian president residency in Valdai. That's not friends. So no, this president is 100% committed to fulfilling the same policy objectives of his predecessors, to strategically defeat Russia, to collapse Russia, and to get rid of Vladimir Putin.
So there's two main things really that to look at all of that, and if we have time, maybe talk about Gaza, but I don't think we do. So the first thing is about Germany. So my grandmother, I think her parents went through the Holocaust, my great-grandparents, and I would never talk to my grandmother really anything about positive about Germany, because I know if I mention to her and it brings back all those memories about Nazi Germany, it's really hurtful. Like I think I mentioned before about all the cars they make, and she gets very upset. So but I don't know that much about Germany, and I haven't been through that, and I've never seen what you're talking about, the Nazification, but I guess I've got to look into that. The second thing is also about.
Let me just quick throw a story. I know time is important here, but I don't want to. But again, just on that, I lived in Germany. Yeah. My dad was stationed in West Germany, and I actually graduated high school in Germany. When we first moved to Germany, we lived in the tiny village of Charlottenbach, which is located outside of Ramstein, the greater Kaiserslautern area. And I made friends with a German teenager my same age. And we'd go out and kick the soccer ball around and all that. And one day he'd invite me into his house, as kids are wont to do. You go raid the refrigerator and all that stuff. One day I was taken down to the basement. The basement was a shrine to Nazi Germany. The basement had all the war paraphernalia of his grandfather, his father, because this is in the 1970s, so the war wasn't that far distant. And I'm talking about Nazi flags, photographs of the soldiers deployed, medals, the whole thing laid out there. And when his parents came home and they saw that I was down in the basement, they kicked me out of the house and I was never invited back again. And to me, that just spoke volumes. We'd go to Garmisch, where the Eagle's Nest was, and as you walk up to the Eagle's Nest, Hitler's thing in Berchtesgaden, there were men on the side who, again, it's the 1970s. These men are in their 50s, which means that they were in their 20s during the war, which means they fought in the war, and at that time, it was illegal to possess any paraphernalia that had the swastika or any German things on it. And they were selling Nazi coins. And so they come up and they try and sell and some of them were selling Nazi medals. So these were Nazis selling things they weren't supposed to sell, not because they needed it, because they were profiting from the secret glorification of the Nazi past, which exists in Germany. This is just the reality of Germany. It's something the Germans forever have to guard against. I'm sorry, Germany, but you are a prisoner of your past. Your grandmother has every right to be angry with the Germans and to never forgive the Germans. That doesn't mean that we have to destroy them forever and punish them forever, but we must hold them to account. And we must remind them that their society, their people, their race, lost faith with humanity. And we can never allow them to go down that path where they can repeat those errors. And yet that's what's happening today. It's happening today. So I'm on Eli Hassell's grandmother's side. I think the Germans have to be treated with a great deal of skepticism.
Okay, and the second thing I wanted to mention to you as well about what you just said before is about Russia. Now, like you asked me, I've never been to Russia. I've never been to Russia. You've lived there for 2.5 years, I believe, when you were working for the United Nations.
No, I worked for the United States. I was there implementing a bilateral treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty between the United States of America and the Soviet Union.
Okay, so it was the United States, not United Nations. So you lived there for a while. So you, of course, know much more than me. You know Russian language, like you said, somewhat. Now, so I guess from my perspective, I live in the West, and I've always seen, human rights organizations and countries saying how Vladimir Putin and Russia as a whole have bad human rights abuses, push down on opposition voices. How would you respond to all of that?
Well, I would start by pointing out that let's go to 1994 and the second long telegram written by a gentleman named Mary, an American diplomat in the Embassy of the United States, where he reflects on American policy. And he said that we are destroying the ability for Russia to build democratic foundations by overemphasizing a market economy that's dependent upon the most undemocratic leader imaginable, Boris Yeltsin. And that he said, we keep sending Americans over to be the savior of Russia who know nothing about Russia. And they come over here and they spout nonsense and garbage, and it's destroying Russia. And that, we, the West collectively will be responsible for what Russia becomes. He said, the salvation of Russia, this is Mr. Mary saying, the salvation of Russia will come in the form of Russian nationalism that teaches Russians to respect Russia again, and that responds exclusively to the needs of Russia, the legitimate needs of Russia, not dictated by Western market economists, but dictated by the needs of the people. That's what Vladimir Putin is. I mean, Mary predicted Putin. But see, notice Mary's spin is that Vladimir Putin is a natural byproduct of Russian reality. Now, Putin came in, and I'm not going to pretend that Putin's perfect, but let's just be clear. He inherited a Russia that had been destroyed by a decade of abuse at the hands of the United States, who empowered entire classes of oligarchs who stole the collective wealth of the Russian people for their exclusive benefit. Putin had to tame that beast. All right. So the first thing he told the oligarchs is, the money you have is your money. I can't undo that. But the money you make in the future is the money, it belongs to Russia. You have to reinvest it in Russia. And two, stay the hell out of politics. You're not going to be allowed to take your stolen wealth and leverage that into political gain. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, I think, thought differently, and he lost his company and was put in jail. Now, you're going to say, oh, that's human rights violation. No. The man was a criminal. He stole the money of Russian people. A thief. And he was told to stay the hell out of politics, and he didn't. So he paid the price. Is that a human rights violation? Hell no. The human rights violation will be allow the oligarchs to continue to steal from the Russian people, from the Russian nation, from the Russian Federation. Now, Vladimir Putin believed in democracy. Still does. But how can you have a democracy when the West destroyed, again, I want to bring you back to Mary's long telegram. The West destroyed Russia's ability to build democratic institutions. There were no viable democratic institutions in Russia when Vladimir Putin became president. Every institution that existed was by design subordinated to the United States, controlled by the United States, controlled by Europe. Putin had to start over again to rebuild the institutions that the West didn't allow. And that's not me making it up. That's not Putin making it up. That's a senior American diplomat saying this straight up. And he was right. How do you begin to build a political opposition, which Putin said we need? He said we absolutely have to have viable political opposition when the CIA and MI6 is funding it. Because now it's not a political opposition. You become a paid agent of a foreign power who's seeking to do what? Collapse Russia, eliminate Vladimir Putin. So the human rights organizations, too, understand this. They were funded by the West to promote not genuine human rights, but to bring down Vladimir Putin. Across the board, there's not a single example that you can say of a major non-governmental organization that had clean hands in Russia. They were funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, which we know is just simply an adjunct for the CIA. They admit it in their founding documents that their job was to do the political covert action that the CIA used to do, but now they're going to disguise it as democracy. Over and over and over again, we see this. There's Navalny. I mean, I know he made a movie and everybody watched it and they think he's God's gift away. He's a CIA asset recruited by Michael McFaul. He was groomed by a CIA operative who was brought in from the Ivy League, set up a parlor in Moscow where she brought people in, did it, identified them. His name was given to McFaul. He was sent to the United States for a 6-month recruitment thing, brought back to Russia to do the bidding of the United States. Fact. And yet everybody treats him as if he's a legitimate. He was a racist pig who, my wife is Georgian, and he called Georgians cockroaches. And he said that the way you deal with Caucasian immigrants is to shoot them. And this is the man that the West is embracing as the paragon of democracy? No. He was handpicked by the CIA to do a job. His job was to create the argument that Vladimir Putin was a corrupt leader, leading a corrupt society, and that there needed to be change. But what change were they promoting? It was, after all, Navalny's deputy that met with an MI6 operative in Moscow saying, I need $10 million to carry out your bidding. That's democracy? It's not democracy. And that's the problem. We are critical of Russia because Russia's not playing our game. We're critical of Russia because Russia refuses to do that which we demand they do. But, Joe Biden went to Russia in March of 2011 as part of the so-called Russian reset. He gave a speech at Moscow State University where he spoke of the wonderful relationship that's enjoyed between the United States and Russia. But it came down to the following. Russia can only thrive if it agrees to enter into a market economy dominated by Western venture capitalists. That we will open up the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to Russia and allow them to thrive. But before that can happen, Russia has to make democratic changes. And what changes did we want? We wanted Vladimir Putin out, and we wanted Dmitry Medvedev in. Why did we want Vladimir Putin out? Because he wouldn't play our game. Why did we want Medvedev in? Because there was a perception at the time that he would become Boris Yeltsin 2.0, that he would allow American investors back into the Russian economy so that we can repeat the control of the Russian society that we had in the 1990s. That's the real state of affairs. That's what we're talking about here. Don't be confused by talks of, a thriving market and a thriving democracy. It's all a control mechanism used by the United States to achieve the domination of Russia, to reassert American dominance over Russia that we enjoyed in the 1990s. That's what it's all about. So, no, I reject outright. I've been to Russia. I'm telling you right now, there's more free speech in Russia than there is in Germany. There's more free speech in Russia than there is in the United Kingdom. There's more free speech in Russia than there is in the United States. You can speak freely in Russia. You just can't take the money of the CIA and speak freely in Russia.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Scott. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.